My name is Cecilia, and I'm 32 years old. The day my parents died, I was sitting in a hospital waiting room with a paper cup of cold coffee in my hands, staring at a television screen that wasn't even turned on. They went together. A car accident on Route 9, 2 miles from the house they'd lived in for 31 years. The doctors said it was quick. I've been told that's supposed to be comforting. It wasn't. My sister Renata arrived at the hospital 40 minutes after I did. She was dressed like she'd come from a dinner party. Heels, lipstick, a blazer that cost more than my monthly rent. She hugged me once, briefly, and then spent the next hour on her phone in the corner. I told myself grief looks different on different people. I told myself a lot of things that week that turned out not to be true. The funeral was on a Thursday. Our extended family flew in from 3 different states. People brought food, flowers, condolences wrapped in careful words. I cried until I had nothing left to cry with. Renata gave a speech at the service that made everyone in the room weep. She was always the better speaker, the one who could perform emotion with a precision that looked exactly like the real thing. I stood beside her at the graveside and held her hand because I thought we were in this together. I thought losing them would make us closer. That was the last moment I believed that. 3 days after the funeral, Renata told me we needed to talk about the house. I'd been staying in my old bedroom, sleeping under the same quilt my mother had made for me when I was 16. I thought we'd figure things out slowly, the way grieving people do. Make decisions when we were steadier, when the world felt less like it was tilting. But Renata sat across from me at the kitchen table with a folder in her hands and a look on her face I hadn't seen before. Controlled. Almost rehearsed. She told me she'd already spoken to the estate attorney. She told me Mom and Dad had updated their will 8 months ago, and that everything, the house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio, all of it, had been left to her. Sole beneficiary. She slid a copy of the document across the table like she was closing a business deal. I didn't speak for a long time. I kept looking at my mother's handwriting on a grocery list that was still pinned to the refrigerator behind Renata's head. Milk. Lemons. The good bread from the bakery on 5th. I asked her if there'd been a mistake. She said no. I asked her why. Why would they leave everything to one of us and nothing to the other? We weren't estranged. I talked to my parents every Sunday. I visited every holiday. I helped my father with his medical appointments for the last 2 years of his life. None of it made sense. Renata didn't have an answer for that. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't feel like sharing it. What she did say was that she needed me out of the house by the end of the month. She said it gently, almost apologetically, the way people say things they've already decided and don't want to argue about. She said I was welcome to take my personal belongings and the furniture from my old room. She said she hoped we could stay close. I moved into a friend's spare room with 2 suitcases and a box of photographs. The will reading was scheduled for the following week at the office of an attorney named Mr. Hargrove, a quiet, careful man in his 60s who had handled my parents' legal affairs for over 2 decades. Renata came in looking the way she always looked when she expected to win something. I came in because I didn't know what else to do. I had no legal claim to contest, no evidence of anything, just the hollow feeling that something had gone very wrong and I couldn't prove it. Mr. Hargrove began reading through the document with the slow, methodical pace of someone who had learned never to rush. Renata sat with her hands folded, nodding slightly at each item as if checking things off a mental list. The house, the primary accounts, the vehicles. And then Mr. Hargrove paused. He looked up from the papers and looked directly at Renata, and he asked, in a voice that was professionally calm but carried a weight underneath it, "Are you sure you understand the will?" "All of it." Renata smiled like it was a strange question. She said yes, of course. She said she'd read it thoroughly. Mr. Hargrove nodded once. Then he turned to the next page, a page Renata clearly hadn't seen, and he kept reading. The room changed. I watched Renata's expression shift in a way I will never forget for the rest of my life. The smile didn't disappear all at once. It dissolved slowly, like something melting from the inside out, as Mr. Hargrove's steady voice filled the silence with words she hadn't prepared for. Words about a secondary trust. Words about an account established 11 years ago, managed separately, never commingled with the estate she thought she'd inherited clean. $27 million. Hidden in plain sight, and left in its entirety to me. I don't think I fully understood what Mr. Hargrove had said until he said it a second time. He repeated the figure clearly, without drama, the way a man who has delivered life-changing news before learns to do it, steadily, so it lands properly rather than shatters. $27 million. A private trust established by my father in 2013, managed through a separate legal entity that had never appeared in any of the documents Renata had been given. It had its own account number, its own trustee history, its own paper trail going back over a decade. My name was on every page of it. Renata's name appeared nowhere. I looked at my sister. She was staring at the document in Mr. Hargrove's hands like she was trying to read it from across the table through sheer force of will. The color had left her face completely. Her hands, which had been folded so neatly in her lap, were now pressed flat against the armrests of her chair. She asked Mr. Hargrove if there had been some kind of error. He told her, politely and without any visible satisfaction, that there had not. He told her the trust had been established with the full knowledge and intention of both our parents, verified by 2 separate attorneys, and that it had been structured specifically to remain outside the primary estate to ensure it transferred directly and without contest. My father was an engineer for 34 years. He was quiet, precise, and deeply private about money. I knew he was careful. I didn't know how careful. I didn't know that for over a decade he had been building something in silence, something he never mentioned, something that lived in documents I had never been shown. I don't know exactly when he decided I would be the one to receive it. I don't know what he saw, or what he knew, or what he feared, but sitting in that room, listening to Mr. Hargrove explain the structure of a trust my father had spent years carefully constructing, I felt something shift in my chest, not triumph, not relief, but something closer to grief mixed with the overwhelming sense that my father had seen everything and said nothing and loved me in the most quiet, protective way he knew how. Renata left the attorney's office without speaking to me. She walked out while Mr. Hargrove was still explaining the transfer process. I heard her heels on the tile floor of the hallway, and then the sound of the heavy front door closing behind her, and then nothing. The weeks that followed were complicated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Renata hired her own attorney. She filed a formal challenge, arguing that the trust had been established under circumstances that warranted review. She used words like undue influence and lack of transparency, the vocabulary of someone who had been told they had a case when they probably didn't. Her challenge was reviewed and ultimately dismissed. The trust documents were clean. My father had been meticulous about that too. I didn't move back into the house. I thought about it. The house was part of Renata's inheritance and legally hers, and I had no interest in fighting over it. What my parents had left her was real. The house, the accounts, a sum of money that would have been more than enough for most people. She had not been left with nothing. She had been left with less than she thought, and that is a different thing entirely, though I understand it didn't feel that way to her. What I did instead was buy a small property 2 towns over, a house with a yard and a porch and enough room for the life I actually wanted to build. I set aside a substantial portion of the trust for a foundation in my parents' names, focused on funding medical resources for families navigating long-term illness. My father had spent the last years of his life managing his own health through a system that was expensive and exhausting, and I wanted something good to come out of those years. Something that lasted. I called Renata once, about 4 months after the will reading. I didn't call to argue or to explain or to make her feel worse than she already did. I called because they were our parents, and losing them was the biggest thing that had ever happened to either of us, and I thought maybe, underneath all of it, she might need to talk to someone who understood that the same way I did. She didn't answer. She hasn't called back. I think about my father often. About the version of him that sat down with an attorney in 2013 and made a decision he never told me about, that he carried quietly for 11 years. I wonder if he knew, even then, how things might unfold. I wonder if he was protecting me from something he saw coming, or simply making sure I would be okay no matter what happened. I'll never be able to ask him. That's the part that stays with me, heavier than the money, heavier than any of it, that the people who loved you most sometimes do it in ways you only get to understand after they're gone. I'm still learning to sit with that. Some days it's easier than others. But I'm still here, still standing, and I have a porch and a yard and a foundation carrying my parents' names into the world, and that, for now, is enough.